Took me about 1 month to make this blue dragon plush. So I began with an Emily Ocker circular cast on for the fingers and toes of the dragon. You can see my cat, she comes in and out of the video once or twice throughout the process. I now begin making the arm, and I start right off from the toes, which I had put onto stitch holding needles. I didn't like the way the arm looked, so I went back again and tried it again for the first arm. I'm going to try to make the second arm exactly the same way I made the first arm. This time I didn't make any mistakes because I had already decided how I wanted it to look. The reason I'm making this dragon is because my nephew was born very prematurely, and he was born in the year of the dragon, even though his due date was in the year of the snake. His birthday's coming up, so I want to make them this blue plush as a present. This is what the arms looked like. I left them on holder stitches, similar to the way I did with the fingers and toes. I begin again with the toes of the feet, the same way I did with the fingers, with an Emily Ocker cast on, and then I work my way up and I do the foot. I made a mistake again, and I went back and did it again, similar to the way I did with the arms. The second foot should go better. I create the heel of the foot by doing short rows, similar to the way you would put a heel into a sock. And I start again for the second foot, second leg. This should go a lot smoother, since I already have decided how I want the legs to look. I always make the limbs of my plush toys before I make the other parts, because I hate sewing things up at the end of a project, so I always make the things beforehand and then just attach them as I go along making the body. That way there's no sewing up to do at the end of a project. This is what the feet looked like afterwards. They should have more shape and form once they're stuffed. So I began making some other appendages. I want it to be a Chinese dragon, so I make it some whiskers. This is just a 4-stitch I-cord, and I begin some horns. I do gradual increases and short rows to make the horn taper up into a curved horn shape, and I do the same for the second horn. I'm also going to add these appendages as I knit the body. I begin the nose with a figure 8 cast on, which doesn't always go great the first time, so I had to try it again, which is fine. And then I begin putting increases into the work as I work in the round to make the nose, and I stitch the whiskers right into the piece as I go. I'm going to do the same for the horns and the arms and legs later on in the piece. I switch from knitting in the round to knitting flat. I'm still using double-ended needles, but I begin knitting flat because this light blue color will make up the belly of the dragon. I will do the rest of the dragon in a darker blue color. I add the arms. I'm just taking the edge stitches from my flat piece and simply knitting them together with 1 stitch at a time from the holder that I was using to hold the stitches on the arm. I'm going to do this for the legs, and I'm going to do it again for the other side of the arm when I make the other half of the body. This way the arms will appear right on the edge of the light blue belly and the darker blue back, which I'll make later. It looks complicated, but you get used to it using so many needles at once. This is my preferred style. So now that I've attached the arms, I just knit flat to make the belly. I want it to be a long, snake-like dragon, so this part takes a little while. Here I begin adding the legs of the dragon. I do the same thing I did with the arms of the dragon, just knitting together the edge stitch with a stitch from the stitch holding needle that I used on the legs. Once that's done, I just begin knitting the bottom side of the tail. Knitting flat still, I just make some decreases and the tail tapers down into a point. After I tie off the last stitch in the tail, I begin cutting some small pieces of dark blue yarn for the mane of the dragon. I want this dragon to have a mane instead of scales along its spine, like a Western dragon would have. It has hair instead. Here's a picture of the belly piece with the tail halfway finished. Next, I begin the head by picking up where I left off, the nose. I knit flat with 3 double-ended needles, joining the dark blue piece to the light blue piece, using a 10-stitch style intertwining of stitches at both edges. I shape the head using a series of increases and short rows. Because the horns were a little thicker than the whiskers, I had to cast off on the first row. I attached the horns and then pick back up on the back row so that they can be stuffed just a little bit later on. Then I begin adding the mane, again because I don't like doing things at the end of the project. I like to work as I go. I'm adding hair to the mane. Every second row, I'm adding 3 hairs, and this begins the longest part of the project, just working all the way down the back of the dragon. This is a progress photo I took halfway through. I've been adding polyester stuffing to the stuffed animal as I go, again because I don't like stuffing my pieces all at the end. I like to see how it looks and make sure that it makes the shape I want before I complete the project. This goes for quite some time. I have to make more hairs as I go. When I get to the arms, instead of doing a 10-stitch intertwining of the edge piece of the back with the edge piece of the belly, which I've been doing so far, I simply knit together the last stitch on the back piece with 1 stitch that's on the holder needle of the arm, and I do this until all the stitches of the arm are attached to the dragon. And I'll do the same thing when I get to the legs. This part of the project was the most time-consuming, but I filmed all of it for you. To stop to make more hair for the mane several times throughout this process. Here you can see me picking the stitches up off of the holding needle for the legs, the same way I did for the arms. Once I've done that, I begin making a slow series of decreases so that the tail can slowly taper down into a long tail. Although it wasn't very noticeable in the final project, I tried to make the hairs in the mane on the tail slightly longer than the hairs from the rest of the mane to give him a bushy tail. As the tail gets narrower and narrower, I make sure that I've fully stuffed all the parts of the animal the way I want it to be stuffed, because once I finish the tail, the stuffed animal will be finished and I won't have a chance to add any more stuffing. This is what the tail looked like once I had fully cast off with a circular cast off. Now I am adding button eyes with a needle and thread. This is what the eyes looked like once they were sewn on. I used 3 buttons for each eye. Next, I did a chain stitch with a yarn needle to draw on the mouth. I've used sewing pins to mark my progress, or else the mouth can look a little weird. I didn't like the first time I did it, so I tried again. Even the second try wasn't perfect, but I think it looks cute. This is what it looks like. And now I have a final video of me playing with the dragon after a month of hard work. He's flying through the air like a Chinese dragon.